Hey everyone, I have a new video today. This is something I've been wanting to do for a while. Basically, I'm a big fan of SGC. I've been hearing a lot of reports lately about PSA and their tightening the number of 10s that they give out. I've been seeing a lot of other YouTubers with videos where they do a box break and submit them to PSA and they get back cards, 7s and 8s, whereas they used to get 9s and 10s on cards that were exactly the same, if not a little worse condition, which I think is a load of crap. If PSA really is changing their grading standards, I think that completely turns me off to PSA. And I think that if that is the case, that they're changing their standards, then what's the point? I mean, that totally invalidates all of their previous grades, right? Because if something was a 10 5 years ago, but it's a 9 today, what does that 10 from 5 years ago mean now? Is it a 10? Is it a 9? Who knows? I also think it could be considered market manipulation if they're trying to make 10s more scarce by tightening their grading standards. But in any event, I've had a large submission that I was planning to send to PSA, and right as I was getting ready to send it, they shut down. And then I started looking at SGC again, who I have submitted to in the past, and I do think has the most consistent and accurate grading of any grading company that I've seen. I know they're sort of a divisive company. Some people hate the tux. I personally like the tux. But in any event, I think one thing they could do is revisit their label. Here is a Maguire that I submitted. This one was mostly just to test out their grading standards and see how well they lined up with what I thought it should get. And in looking at this, I thought it should be a 9, only because of this little catch here. And it came back a 9. I think I am pretty much not going to submit to PSA anytime soon. I think that big order that I have is going to go to SGC once their prices go down. Right now, they're currently at $30 a card, which I think is still a little bit steep, but I think their grading standards are second to none. So this is a video I've wanted to make for a while. With all that said, and full disclosure, I'm a professional graphic artist, both an illustrator and graphic designer. Some of you know my custom cards that I make. I'll show a few of them here. I just love cards. I love designing cards, and I think the aesthetics of a card, and in this case, a slab, can have a huge impact on the overall presentation of a card. With that being said, I think SGC's label, it works, it's fine, but I think it could be better. So here's a Maguire from my previous submission to SGC. And in looking at this label, I see a few things that I think just as a graphic designer, I would revisit and maybe give a second look to and maybe edit. You don't necessarily need to completely reinvent the label, but I think there are some small changes that could be made, which is what I'm going to be talking about today. So here we have the SGC label from this Maguire, right? Exactly the same label. I just cropped in on it. But in looking at this label, just from a graphic design standpoint, there's a few things that bump me about it. Number one, I don't like how the top black border is thicker than the other three. These three borders are the same size. This one's heavier. And I think ostensibly it's just because they wanted to put this SGC logo at the top and make it not a super tiny font. So that's throwing me a little bit. So the first thing I would do is I would make all the borders the same thickness. I think it'll just give a nicer symmetry to the slab. When I look at it, it seems backwards. It seems like if any of the borders is going to be heavier, it should be the bottom border. But with all this dead space in here, I mean, there is a lot of dead space on this card. Even on cards that have 3 lines, like this Eloy that I grabbed off of Reddit. This is somebody else's card. But if you look at it, there's a ton of dead space. And I don't know, like, I think maybe we could get rid of some of that dead space. Part of the way you could do that is by making the borders all balanced and symmetrical. The next thing that bugs me, and this is kind of the number one thing, if I was going to change one thing about the SGC label, this is what I would change. This SGC over on the left, it doesn't make sense to me to have it over on the left. Maybe they're trying to set themselves apart from PSA, who, with the lighthouse, it's centered. I think theirs is actually at the bottom, if I'm not mistaken. But in any event, I know that PSA has theirs in the center. I think just graphically speaking, it would work a million times better in the center. So the first thing I would move is I would put the SGC in the center. So we go from that to that. Okay, fair enough. Now, when I look at this as a graphic designer, having this padding here above the text not be the same as the padding on the side here or here doesn't make sense to me. I think that you could easily just shift that text over. The exact same text. I think I maybe made it slightly smaller, maybe, but you could move this over and have the padding be symmetrical. So again, it feels balanced. I think that the number one thing that doesn't work about this overall is it's not balanced. And it starts with the SGC on the left, and then it continues being not balanced by this thin bit here not equaling this thin bit here, if that makes sense. I think if you took the lines and you made that padding consistent and you made it so that if there is a third line, like obviously there's not a third line on this, but if there was, you could make it so that it's nice and centered. The padding here is equivalent to here and here. I don't know if it's necessarily perfect. I might even just move it down a little bit, but I think you should center this up top to bottom. When you look at, let's say, this Eloy, you could see there's a huge chunk down here. And I get it, like sometimes you need 4 lines, I guess, but the vast majority of cards, you don't need 4 lines. The vast majority of cards you're gonna see in an SGC Tux, you're gonna have 2 lines. So I think something like this is probably a better bet than that. So already we're feeling more balanced, I think. Now the next thing is I love the giant numbers. I think it sets the label apart, and I personally like the fact that you could tell what the grade is from outer space on an SGC slab. You could look at it from across the room and see that 9. I like that. I think it's different than PSA's tiny little grades. I think it's the biggest grade of all the slab labels. So I think that works. But the thing that I think doesn't work about it is having it inset like this, and then having this mint non-numeric grade to the right of it. I think that this could move over and this could move to the left. Basically just swapping those two. So I would take the 9 and I would move it in, and I would make that padding equivalent to the top and side padding there. And then I would take the near mint or whatever, and I would move it to the center, top to bottom, and I would move it to the left of the 9. The other thing I would do with this, if you look at, like, let's say again, this Eloy or even my mark here, if you look at where the text lines up, the top of the descriptive block of text does not line up with the top of the 9. And if you look at this Eloy, not only does that happen, but when you have a third line, it's just above the bottom of the number. And there's no reason for that. I think an easy fix to, again, make this whole thing feel more balanced is to line them up, which is what I've done here. You have this block of text lining up with the top of the number. And if you have a third line of text, let me just turn that back on, it could line up with the bottom of the number. And like I said before, if you have an instance where you have 4 lines of text, you could bump all this up and add a 4th line below and still have it be, more or less centered. It would kill the padding symmetry, but that's kind of just the price you pay. You could also shrink the text down if you have 4 lines, but I wouldn't do that. I would probably move all this up and put the 4th line underneath. But all that being said, I think this is already looking a lot more balanced and symmetrical than that. Now, the last thing I would change is you have to deal with the serial number, right? So I think there are 2 really obvious places to place the serial. And I think, putting it over in this corner, it maybe sort of helps to balance the existing label, but I think you're a lot better off putting it right in the middle at the bottom there. And I think it would look great on 2-line cards, but I think having that there like that makes a million times more sense. You could also place it at the top if you wanted to, just under that SGC. So you have SGC, serial, card description, grade. So I think that would work quite well too. So overall, I think taking this label and making these small, subtle changes, it wouldn't change the overall aesthetic of the label. It would still read as an SGC. And when you saw an old one, it's not that different from if they went this way. Still reads as an SGC label. It just reads as sort of like a minor update that just, I think, personally, visually works much better. So If you were to take this and pop it onto this Mark McGuire, it would look like this. So I think between this and this, personally, I would prefer this. I think overall it looks a lot better. It's balanced. It doesn't take away from the card with any sort of intrusive design elements. It's sort of benign, and it's obvious what it is. It's obvious what the grade is, and it doesn't interfere with the card. The last thing I would suggest with their label is, I like the white SGC, but I think one thing that could really set this off a little bit more would be to make this logo, this SGC logo, some sort of foil. To make it silver foil, holographic foil, just something. And you don't want to rip off the lighthouse design that PSA has, but I think just a little bit of foil would really just set the whole thing off. It would look like this on the card. So that's my 2 cents. I don't know if SGC is ever going to see this video, but this is just my humble suggestion for how they can make their label a little bit more balanced and a little bit more visually pleasing than the existing label. And yeah, like I said before, I'm a big fan of the tux. I'm a big fan of SGC's grading standards. I'm not a fan of the current $30 price point, but something tells me that's going to go down as the market cools off and as they get their game ramping up even further than they have. But yeah, I personally, I think I'm just done with PSA. I was so ready to submit to PSA, and now I don't think PSA is going to be back until the end of the year. They're saying July. I think that's a pipe dream. I think they still have a huge backlog that they got to clear out, and it's not happening in June. I don't think it's happening. So anyway, SGC, if you're out there listening, I love the tux. Like I said, I love your guys' grading standards. I love the consistency that I see when I watch SGC reveals. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you all later.